Fun Ideas Productions presents the Fun Ideas Podcast.
This is the Slow Poisoner. I come to you from the future with these words of warning.
It's a hot horror planet. 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 Living in science fiction. Past the point of no returning. We got high on gasoline. And we blew the scene.
Hi, this is Mark Arnold, and welcome to Fun Ideas Podcast number 96. This episode is sponsored by the fine folks at Lee's Comics. Attention comic book fans, Lee's Comics of Mountain View, California has closed. But here's the good news. Lee's Comics eBay store is still going strong with over 10,000 vintage comics, the majority of which are now on sale, for half off. Choose from Lee's huge stock of golden, silver, bronze, and modern age comics, and specializing in Silver Age Marvel titles. You can count on friendly service, accurate grading, and quick, secure shipping backed by a money-back guarantee. To check out Lee's eBay store, go to eBay. Click Advanced Search to the left of the search bar, scroll down to Sellers, and enter Lee's Comics Inc., period. That's LeesComics Inc., period. Don't forget the period. Lee's Comics is shipping daily with no delays. New items daily. Mention the Fun Ideas Podcast and get a free bonus gift.
Long title, Looking for the Good Times, Examining the Monkey Song One by One, by Michael A. Ventrella and Mark Arnold. A book that examines each song, gives lots of details about each song, and our own personal opinions. You can find this book on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, and anywhere where good books are being sold. Our webpage is wordpress.monkeys.com, where you can see many of the songs and give your own opinions of them. And we will be discussing this more on Zilch.
Hey Michael, it says here we've written another book about the monkeys. Wasn't the first one enough?
Not at all, Mark. Our original book, Looking for the Good Times, Examining the Monkey Songs One by One, was very successful, but only covered half the story.
Which half?
The group half. Our new book, Headquartered, A Timeline of the Monkeys' Solo Years, covers the solo half.
Who knew the monkeys record so many solo albums?
Not only that, but this book covers all of their solo projects, including stage shows, horse racing, running record labels, directing and starring in TV shows and movies, voice acting, and jail.
Jail? Did the monkeys go to jail?
You have to read the book to find out.
You sold me. Have you sold them?
Who's them?
Those people out there listening to this.
Well, listen to this. This book has discographies, photos, and other information about the prefab four, Mickey, Davey, Peter, and Mike, the Solo Monkeys, plus another nifty cover by Scott Shaw.
Wow, he did our last cover, and this one's equally good. Where can you get this masterpiece?
Announcer?
That's me. Get Headquartered, a timeline of the monkey solo years, written by Michael A. Ventrella and Mark Arnold. Those two guys. It's available in hardback, paperback, or ebook from BearManorMedia.com or from Amazon. Get your copies today.
Cool. I'm going to get one today. There's been good news and bad news regarding my Warren Kremer book and my TTV scrapbook. Bad news first. The publisher I was working with has canceled both books. Now, the good news. It's Bear Manor Media to the rescue. Not only will they be publishing Friendly Ghosts, Little Devils, Giants, and Rich Kids, the art and creations of Warren Kremer, and the TTV scrapbook, but now they will be in color. There will be more details soon. I'm also still working on my Mad and Disney books, and a Popeye article. Do you like ska music? Do you know what it is? Today we feature fan and expert Aaron Carnes, who has written a book on the subject. This particular episode is also available in video version, making it our 4th video podcast.
And here we are on Fun Ideas podcast number
96. I had to look at my little note because I don't know what number we're on. Today our guest is Aaron Carnes. He's a cinematographer and an author, written some articles for Metro. I don't know if you still do. Written a couple books, and you have a current book called the In Defense of Ska, or Ska Music.
Yes.
But we'll probably talk about everything. So anyway, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So as I usually start out on Fun Ideas podcast, I always say, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got interested in music and writing and cinematography, because I've seen you do all those things, and you might even do other things that I don't know. So go ahead.
Sure. So I started writing sometime in my 20s. I was actually interested in fiction for a good number of years. And then in 2010, I started to feel like I wanted to write nonfiction, and mostly because I was thinking that this would be a way to actually make money instead of just writing fiction and having no one pay for it. I thought, well, nonfiction might be a little bit more profitable. And I did a little bit of local journalism with some community papers, and then I started writing for the Metro, I think late 2010.
Yeah.
And from that, I built a, music journalism freelance career out of that. I've written for, I don't really write, so occasionally I write for Metro, but I write for Good Times, Santa Cruz. I'm the music editor there. I've written for a number of publications, including I did some articles for Playboy, Salon, OZ, Sierra Club. So I have a pretty good, and music journalism is my primary outlet. Occasionally I'll venture into other territories. The cinematography film stuff isn't really much of part of my life these days, but it does have an interesting stepping stone to becoming a music journalist, and that's that I was producer for the Cactus Club documentary, and that's just that was a local club in San Jose from like 88 to 2002. Me and a couple guys made this film. When I was called Metro and I said, hey, I really want to write for you, I got quizzed a little bit on my, local music knowledge. And so I pulled that one out. I said, I just finished this film about the Cactus Club. And I think that definitely gave me an in. So not a big part of my life now, but definitely a big part of how I got to become a music journalist. In terms of ska music, in the 90s, I was a huge ska fan. I was a ska musician. I got into ska about early 90s. 92, I think, was when I first heard the music. I saw the band Skank and Pickle. You probably know them, right? Because you're from South Bay.
Yeah.
I saw them at a club called One Step Beyond in Santa Clara. Do you remember that place? Yep. Okay. Yeah. Everyone came through that club. But they were local. They're from technically Los Gatos, but just San Jose, South Bay, and a friend of mine told me to go see them. I was just kind of interested in like local underground music. That was sort of my passion when I was in high school, and somebody kind of pointed me in the direction of Skank and Pickle, and that was just like a moment of just being blown away, and just totally made me a fan of this music that I learned was called ska, and eventually learned a whole bunch about it. So as a music journalist in the last decade, I've always continued to love ska, but I got more interested in music writing, and I was reading more music books and reading more articles. And I think I was aware of this already, but it really became apparent to me how little music journalism and, people who were tastemakers and all these people, they did not care about ska at all. In fact, it was just a joke. It was just something to make fun of. And I think it's even gotten worse, like with the way ska has become like a little joke to throw in TV shows now, like the last decade. Just a little ska reference, like the character, such and such character used to be into ska, and it's like some humiliating part of their past that everyone jokes about.
It's kind of like mimes or clowns or something. They used to be cool, and now they're scary or considered, not cool to be interested in or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That was a big motivator for me to want to write a book about ska and try to say something about this music and the scene, which I feel like is so much more than everybody jokes about. People who were not involved in the scene, didn't go see these bands. It's not the jokes of it being all these dorky white kids in fedoras and checkered pants. That's not what ska was about, and that's not what the scene was like.
Yeah.
And it kind of irks me that the jokes aren't even accurate. And so I feel like I wanted to defend the music and also kind of educate about the music too. Right. So that's what led me to this book.
Mm-hmm. Well, you gave me a copy of it. Obviously, I didn't have time to read it in like 2 days here because I'm busy all the time. But I kind of flipped through it on the computer and everything. And I do have kind of a working knowledge of ska, and I'm familiar or a fan of some major ska bands of the past. I assume you talk about the history where ska originated and everything like that. What I wanted to know, and I will read it in the book, but I mean, if you could kind of give a brief summary, did it originate out of reggae music, or is it kind of its own thing? How did it start?
So reggae music evolved from ska.
Oh, okay.
So ska music started in the 50s in Jamaica and kind of went into the early 60s. The music in Jamaica was sort of a gradual evolution. So ska music, and then in the mid-60s, you start seeing what they call rocksteady, which is a little different of a beat, a little different tempo. And then in the late 60s, it starts to turn into reggae, but it's sort of the early version of reggae, which is a little bit more of a upbeat, bouncy style. Yeah. And then in the 70s, it turns into what we call now roots reggae, which is sort of the more popular version of reggae, the slower version.
Is that like the Bob Marley type stuff?
Yeah, the really deep bass, the spiritual, all that stuff. That's what's kind of more popular. But ska was sort of the beginning. I mean, aside from what they call mento, which is sort of more indigenous folk music. That was sort of the predecessor to ska. But yeah, ska was kind of the beginning of what led to reggae. And then
I didn't know it was that way. So, okay.
And then the late 70s, ska came back in the late 70s in England.
Right.
That's the bands like the Specials.
Yeah, and that's the first stuff I heard. Yeah.
They were listening to old ska records. That was out. It was just kind of out of fashion at that point. It was white punk kids, and there was some Caribbean kids. The white punk kids kind of thought it was this cool, like, old music. The Caribbean kids thought it was sort of like boring dad music, as the stuff their dad listened to that was like, the reggae stuff was where it was at, not this old ska music. But they sort of got together and created a new version of ska, which was a lot faster. It was a lot more political, and it dealt with the issues that were happening in England, the politics of England, with racism, with anti-immigration, all those things, and they were almost all the bands, all of them except for Madness, were mixed race too, which was a political statement in and of itself. And that's where the new revival of ska began. It began in that, and then from there it took off and came to every other country on the planet, and it kind of created scenes and stuff.
Mm-hmm. And so probably the biggest bands during that time were like the English Beat, and I think Fun Boy 3 was one, and
they were like more of a new wave band, but they were 3 members of the Specials when the Specials broke up and started this band.
Okay. And let's see, what was there's another group. I always think of the Twin Tone label, but I can't think of all the groups. And I guess English Beat also begat like Fine Young Cannibals and Ranking Roger and
General Public too.
Yeah, General Public, that's the one I was thinking of. And then later, there was groups like No Doubt and stuff like that, and they had a very big ska influence. Is that related in any way? I mean, obviously they're American and not British, but I mean, is there a direct lineage, or is it just, hey, we're interested in ska, we're going to do it too?
There is a direct lineage, and this is where some of the ska narrative gets a little off by the general, like, mainstream narrative culture. The narrative is that in the mid-90s, there was a third wave ska revival. Bands like No Doubt, Real Big Fish, Save Ferris, Mighty Mighty Bosstones. That's kind of how it's presented. But what really happened was when the two-tone British bands were popular in like 79, 80, 81, that music trickled into the U.S. It wasn't it was very, very popular, very mainstream in England. This was like top 40 pop music. Right? It was very popular. In the U.S., it was like underground music. It didn't have a big audience, but it had a very loyal, rabid audience. So that sort of created all these 80s ska bands that were never bigger than the club scenes. Like you had, in LA, you had this band called the Untouchables. In the Bay Area, there was a band called the Uptones.
Oh, yeah.
Boston had a band called Bim Scala Bim. In New York, there was a band called the Toasters, but that band's more known because they continued on through the 90s, and they were popular in the 90s. So that's sort of what happened. Those bands formed in the early to mid 80s, and they created really vibrant scenes within their cities, and they started touring in the mid to late 80s, and more bands started coming out in the late 80s. Skank and Pickle started in like 88, 89, something like that. You see a whole new bunch of bands in the late 80s, and most of those bands are more punk-oriented, that they're forming in the late 80s, and then more bands are forming in the early 90s, and by the time you get to the mid-90s, there's this really huge, vibrant underground scene, hundreds of bands. There's record labels that are devoted to ska that are doing super well. There's zines. There is compilations. There's tons of compilations. And these bands are on tour. They're making livings off of it. And then you start to see these bands get on the radio and MTV after all of this has been building up for like 15 years. And then it's like 5 or 6 bands from that are the ones that are put on MTV and the radio, and they're the ones sort of presented as American ska third wave. But they came from a scene of hundreds and hundreds of bands, and they were all unique. They did their own version of it. You know, they had their own image. So that was part of the thing too, is that ska was like really diverse in terms of its musical styles and in terms of how the bands dressed and stuff. But because there was only 5 bands that got on MTV, the way they looked sort of became, this is what ska looks like, you know. Money Boss Tones wear flannel. Real Big Fish had Hawaiian shirts. So that's ska.
Right.
Yeah, but that's not reality.
So how has it gone to that? Because you're saying that was pretty popular and successful, even though it was very limited and narrow in focus.
Sure.
To where you said earlier that, like present day, people kind of make fun of it. Where did that kind of turn of events happen?
I think it came from that mostly because ska left the mainstream around 99, 2000, you know, and then when it left, it kind of became really uncool. People, you know, where it was once maybe a teeny bit cool, when it was on MTV, it just became the antithesis of uncool right away. Just nerd kids in their dorky hats. That's how it got presented. And a lot of bands quit. A lot of bands broke up. A lot of bands tried to present themselves like they weren't ska, like they would alter their music a little bit just so that it could be construed as a different style. But also a lot of bands continued on, and a lot of people continued to be fans of the music, but it went underground again. And as far as like mainstream culture was concerned, the music was totally dead. But for the next 2 decades, from then to present, it continued on in the underground scene, and it continued to be popular. So I think what started happening about 5-10 years ago is that some of the kids who grew up in the 90s who weren't really super into the scene, but they kind of got swept up into what was happening in the mainstream culture, they're now creating shows, and they're kind of involved in the media, basically. So of course they go, oh, I remember this dumb thing I was into for 2 years, and how stupid is that I used to wear fedoras and Hawaiian shirts, and I was really into Real Big Fish. And that thing's totally dead. It's so funny. So they would write that into a show, and I think it's getting like more and more reinforced that it was a 2-year trend that was ridiculous. It was just right in between grunge and swing, and it's like they're missing the whole through line, and that it's always been, since the two-tone stuff, it's always been popular. There's always been a lot of bands, there's always been a lot of fans, and there's always been a lot of versions of it.
Yeah.
In fact, there's like a ton of new young bands right now that are playing the music, and they're doing really well, and they have audiences, and they're making interesting music. Yeah.
So do you think, because of what's currently going on, what you're talking about on the underground level, do you think it'll make a comeback yet again?
I don't think it's going to come down. I don't think it's going to come back to the mainstream now. I think it's going to stay in the underground. But I think some people outside of the scene who like underground music, I think they're starting to notice that ska is a part of that, and that it's not just the trendy stuff in the 90s, that it is more than that. So I think it is sort of developing in a more organic way, but I don't see it becoming like super popular.
Interesting. Yeah, it's like I was thinking about my record collection, and I go, I have an awful lot of ska stuff, but and I didn't even realize it because because you're saying the hats and the shirts and everything like that. Like, I love Madness, but I think I love them not because they do ska type music. I think it's because they're funny. They do comical stuff, and a lot of their videos were really amusing, like the typical Our House one, and things like that. I mean, they did tons of records that didn't even make the charts here.
They're gigantic in England. They're like legends in England.
Yeah,
so many hits in England, yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, some of their albums aren't readily available here, so you have to get the imports and stuff like that. So but and I didn't even realize it. It's like I just like things like English Beat, and I like things like No Doubt and stuff like that. And I wasn't really thinking about, it's all that same type of ska beat. So I guess I'm a fan without even really knowing it.
Those two-tone bands, I think, like, it was baked into the equation right away that they were not going to be traditional Jamaican music, that it was always going to be a mixture of ska and other stuff. So you see Madness and English Beat and the Specials, they all were experimenting musically, and they were never staying true to ska music. And so that's kind of how they set up ska for this whole new, like, revival that happened since the late 70s.
Yeah. But it seems like they always still seem to have their fans, because, I mean, we're talking about the Metro that you used to write, or that you still write for, or you used to write for?
Occasionally, but mostly I write for other papers, yeah.
Okay. But they used to have the free concerts during the summer, which are long gone, but so am I. I don't live down there. But they used to get the English Beat, like, every other year, and it's like, some people were there that they go, oh, I love the English Beat, and they're all dancing and everything like that. And then I would do the bit where it's like, hey, come on, let's go listen to them. They go, do I even know them? And then, everyone I've ever brought to see the English Beat, they go, I know that song, I know that song, I know that song, because it's just like they just don't realize Mirror in the Bathroom and all those different ones that they did, were played commonly on the radio for a time, it's like, and then, just got drilled in the head, I guess, as far as memorable. So so that's why it seems kind of odd that you'd say that you don't think it'll make any sort of comeback currently. But I mean,
not in a mainstream way. I think it's making a pretty strong comeback in the underground world. Like, I think it's more vibrant and energetic in the underground scene now than it was maybe even like 5 or 10 years ago with the new younger bands, because these new younger bands they're coming at it from a different way. They're coming at it as punks, kind of like underground punks that don't want anything to do with the mainstream.
Do they sound any different? I mean, like you said that the ones that originated in England in the 80s and 90s kind of had a political bent. I mean, is that still the case, or they tend to write on other subjects? I would say it's more political now than than in, like, say, the 90s. The 90s was a mix of bands that were political and goofy and all kinds of different things. But a lot of the bands now, I would say, are more geared towards being punk and being political. Of the bands, the new crop of bands, I would say, yeah. And on the new crop of bands, they tend to, if they're staying underground, I guess, do they have recording contracts or even press discs or anything, or are they just doing live? Yeah. Because right now with the pandemic, how do you do anything? I don't know. So what do they do?
Yeah, there's a few good indie labels that are kind of at the head of this. Like Bad Time Records is definitely a major one here in the U.S.
Okay, so they are distributed. It's just not like, top 40 radio, as it were. But
exactly,
but you could even say that, not just about ska. You could say that about, like, general rock and roll. It's like,
that's true.
Even that's not even real mainstream anymore, strangely enough. So
there was a few years ago, I would say maybe 5 years ago.
Yeah.
There was a band called the Interrupters that had a pretty big ska song. She's Kerosene. That song got pretty big. But I think that was a little bit of a fluke. And those bands are backed by, that band is like friends with and supported by Rancid, which is why I think they ended up getting that sort of push. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what is the future? What do you expect to get out of the book? I mean, just to make a few ska converts, or is it just like a pet project for yourself, saying, "I love ska and I don't care who knows it"?
Converts, in a way, yes. I mean, I'm hoping to change the narrative a little bit with like music people. People that are into music that will give the time of day to every single subgenre of alternative music and give it all this respect and put it into the thread of the musical landscape. I'm hoping that ska will be considered a little bit more seriously within that. Mm-hmm. That's kind of my hope. And I've talked to a fair amount of people who either didn't like ska, didn't know much about ska, that have taken an interest in my book and have read it or read parts of it and have felt already a little bit like, maybe I should reconsider my biases towards ska music. So mm-hmm. That's what I think the book will be loved by people who already like ska, but I think people who don't know much about it or don't like it or claim to not like it, I think they'll enjoy it, and I think that they'll come away with stuff that they didn't expect, and that's respect for this music.
Yeah. For me, I had respect for the music, but I didn't know much about its history. Yeah. So it's like, as soon as I saw your book, I feel cool. Now, I will tell you the truth. We haven't talked for years, I think, but it's like, I knew you were working on this book, but for some reason, I confused it. I thought you wrote a book about the San Jose music scene. That is what you did your documentary on. So, but did that documentary beget this book, as it were? Is that what caused it to come about? Or
not really? I mean, the documentary helped kind of give me a leg up into getting into music journalism, and then music journalism, doing that for a few years, really made me want to write a book. I actually started working on this book in like 2013. Mm-hmm. So it was a pretty long process to write it. So I had been working on it for quite a while. So yeah. So I guess indirectly it did, yeah.
And I think I remember you mentioning it, but for some reason I always thought, oh yeah, he's doing a book on the San Jose music scene. I was like, good luck to you on that, because I mean, it's like a documentary is one thing, but it's like, unless you're in the Bay Area, I don't know. But then I was surprised, like, oh, it's about ska in general. Okay. So it's good to read before you do a podcast. Anyway, but when you're doing your music journalism, let's kind of back up a little bit.
Sure.
Did you cover all types of music, or were you assigned? How did that career work? Did they tell you where to go?
Yeah, I've always written about a variety of music, and I've rarely ever been assigned anything. That world, at least from my experience, is generally like, yes, you can write for us, or yes, we're open to let you write for us, but pitch us all your ideas.
Oh, wow.
And so you're always the person coming up with the ideas. Every once in a while, an editor that you have a good relationship might say, hey, can you write this thing for me? But generally, it's like you come up with the ideas, you pitch them, you convince me to let you write this. So I did that. I've done that a lot, still do that. And as a music fan, musician, I've always had an interest in like a wide range of styles. So, and I've approached writing that way too. So. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what other genres have you written about, or that you like, even if you haven't written about it?
Oh yeah, I mean everything. It depends on the outlet. I mean, when I write now, I contribute a lot to Santa Cruz, so it's dependent on their scene, which there's a lot of like indie rock, indie folk kind of stuff. I'll do like hip hop stuff too. I think the styles probably the styles I do the least amount would be something more like heavy metal or jazz. Like those are things I don't necessarily dislike them. I just don't have a lot of knowledge. Mm-hmm. But things like, indie rock and, a little bit of reggae or, hip hop, those things I know a lot more folk music. Santa Cruz loves like folk music and bluegrass, so I do that stuff too. So yeah, it was really, and I'll write about music I'm not that into because I like music and I like reading about music, so I'm happy to do it.
We're dancing.
Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, the reason I asked is because I had a female friend. I'm still friends with her. She's down in the San Jose area, and she was also a music writer, mainly online. And she would get told what to do, but she also had a big audience, a big knowledge base, I should say, not that. And in her case, they gave her free tickets. And I used to be her quasi-date back in the old days because, I was single and she was too. And, we'd go to things and we'd go to like heavy metal one week, like one of the groups was called like the Black Label Syndicate. And then the next week, we saw like Total Punk with the Prodigy. And then the next week we saw Michael Bublé. It's like, I was fine going to it because I just love music too. But I was like, it was like a weird mixture. And of course, different people were like, you saw Prodigy. And then other people, you saw Michael Bublé. And that's like, yeah, so I was just wondering out, and also when I write my articles mainly about animations and comic books and stuff like that, they usually assign me something, so that's why I'm like, wow, you can come up with your own ideas. Now I do with my books. So most of my books, I come up with my own ideas because, I've been doing it so long. I said, can I do a book on this? And most of the time they'll say yes. Sometimes they but,
when I used to live in San Jose, I used to kind of get into shows a lot more. It would in a way, it almost didn't matter if I was writing about it or not. You could just kind of request, get to know the clubs. And the one I always wanted to go to was the Mountain Winery in Saratoga because those are like amazing shows. Whether or not you like the music, it's just a nice environment. And so I got to see a few of those shows for free. The best one I got to go to was when Weird Al played the Mountain Winery. I got to go. I got maybe second row tickets, and that was awesome. That was like one of my favorite shows I've been to.
The one I used to go to, and now I can let it out of the bag because I don't even know if they do them anymore. I used to sneak into the Montalvo shows because where my dad's house was and is, he basically was in the backyard of Montalvo. You have to go down the road and into the bushes and stuff like that. Yeah. But you could sneak into any concert for free. And, I saw a lot of big name acts because I got a few things over the years. And, the one I remember well is I went to see Ringo Starr just because this is the closest a Beatle will be in my living room. I'm going to go.
Yeah.
And you just had to go after they started because then they weren't looking for tickets. But if you went before that, they'd want a ticket. So you always have to miss the very beginning of the show. But
yeah.
I never got into Mountain Winery for free. That was always a little more difficult. So, but I saw a few things there. Yeah. So where do you live now? Are you in Sacramento or are you in Santa Cruz?
Sacramento.
Oh, okay. So
I'm the music editor at Santa Cruz newspaper, Good Times, but yeah, I live in Sacramento. So.
Okay, so do you commute a lot for this?
No, I do it all on phone, online. The only time I really find myself going down there is if I'm working on a cover story. I might feel like I need to go in person and do some reporting, but most of it I can do over the phone or online.
Is there stuff to write about? Because, as we keep saying, there's no shows for the most part going on.
It kind of halted at first for a month or two, and then mostly that it halted because the paper was running out of money because all the businesses were closing, and so the paper was being consumed. People were reading the paper, but they were suddenly just out of ad revenue, so they had to just really trim it down to nothing to keep it going, and then businesses started reopening. They got a few grants and stuff like that, so they were able to kind of get it back opening, and so they asked me to continue to do music stuff. So I've been interviewing bands who putting out records, just putting out singles, just whatever. Musicians are pretty active putting out stuff, whether or not there's shows. So there's a lot of stuff for me to write about. I usually write pretty much every week these days about some band in Santa Cruz.
So you're mainly doing interviews more than anything else, or
Yeah.
you know, I'm totally unaware. I mean, it's like I know some movie theaters have opened up, but I mean, have shows come back at all where you're like wearing a mask or something, or is it?
So in Santa Cruz, and it's probably true in other places, what you'll see is a few places are doing outdoor dinner and a movie shows.
Okay.
In Santa Cruz, there's a place called Michael's on Main, which is mainly a restaurant, but they've been a pretty solid part of the music scene. But they have like a place inside with a stage and a couple hundred people. So they reopened serving food, and they would do stuff where they'd have the band play, and they would have outdoor tables spread apart. So it would be probably like 40, 50 people, but you would pay, your ticket would be a dinner and a movie. So you're paying for your dinner and the movie's entertainment.
Right.
So there's a little bit, that's the only thing that's really going on in terms of a legit way. People are probably putting on house shows, but that's the only thing that's going on in a legit way in California, at least. I don't know about other states.
Yeah, I think up here, there are a few places that still have live bands, but they all took a break, you know, certainly from like March to like June or July.
Yeah.
There was nothing, you know, and then, but there's like this restaurant up here that tends to play like jazz and blues and stuff like that. And it's called Max. And I haven't been back there since they started their schedule, but I mean, they have a venue that can accommodate outside seating and a band playing outside as opposed to inside. So maybe that's probably what they're doing. I just haven't gone back there because, you know, I just don't. It's not like I'm afraid. I mean, you know, my fiance and I, we've traveled all around Oregon. We just play it safe. We wear masks and stuff like that. And, you know, but we just don't go into big crowd things. Like the year before, we were going up to like the state fair in Salem because every night there was like a huge old band, like the Beach Boys was one night, and Steve Miller, and then REO Speedwagon. And so we were driving. Salem's like an hour away, so we were driving like an hour every night, you know. Yeah. So, but it was cool.
I actually haven't got any shows. I mean, I'm not completely against it, but I kind of, the way I view the situation we're in now is that you kind of pick and choose your risks, and you try not to do every single risk you can think of. So, you know, hiking's important to me. So my wife and I go hiking, and we try to be safe and try to, you know, go in. Not a lot of people are there, and we haven't, you know, we'll go pick up food, bring it home, that kind of stuff. So kind of just pick and choose a few risk areas, but not every single thing. And seeing live music, as much as I love live music, doesn't feel like a high priority for that risk, you know, the kind of things I'm choosing to risk myself on. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just curious how the scene was down there, but you know, it's like, sounds like, you know, it's an easy way to do it, and that you don't have to be face to face as long as you can do like what we're doing, a Zoom meeting or over the phone or whatever. You know, you can interview almost anybody if they want to pull out their guitar or whatever and start strumming away and playing something for you. You can get an exclusive concert that way or something, you know. Let's see, what was I going to ask you? Just wanted to know, you know, you said you kind of put down the camera, as it were. That's kind of how I met you in the first place, I believe. You know, as our mutual friend Jaime, and
that was the comedy thing, right? That's when we first met. Yeah.
So, I mean, how did that originate, and how did you get into that? Just out of curiosity.
So, I was interested. Music and film were both things I was interested in since I was a kid. I started playing music in band in 4th grade, and then I started doing bands with my friend at about sophomore. So before that, my friends and I would always, I would say probably like junior high to early high school, we would always get together and make movies with my parents' camcorder. So these two things in my life were like the things I loved. So when I went to college, I went to college, I did junior college, and then I dropped out, but then I went back to college when I was in like 27, 28. And I was like, film is the thing that I should study because it's one of the things I love, right? Mm-hmm. And I got a degree at San Jose State with film. I started that cactus documentary while I was in college and finished it after. And I did some other stuff, some one-off gigs like the thing with Jaime. I did some wedding videos. I did a variety of things, but I really just, I don't know. I just didn't enjoy it. Like, when it came down to it, like, I liked the idea of it, but I didn't enjoy the act of it. And I just was like, ah. And I got into writing in my 20s just because I started really falling in love with books and stuff. And I really wanted to, I don't know, I really wanted to write books or wanted to write short stories or whatever. So, I don't know, I just did that. I didn't necessarily feel like there was much of an opportunity with that. But yeah, like I said, I burnt out on film, but I was like, you know, maybe there's something with writing. Maybe I can do something that's nonfiction or write for a newspaper. Like, those are paying jobs. So
yeah,
it's not the same as trying to convince somebody to buy your like weird novel, right?
Yeah.
So I moved into that territory, and I really enjoyed it. I think I could see it gave me a lot of insight into the things that people are passionate about versus the things that you enjoy doing. I didn't enjoy the work of film. I liked the idea of it, but I didn't enjoy the work that it took to make it. But when it came to writing, I did enjoy it, and all the things that were not easy about writing. You do these long interviews, you transcribe your interviews, you try to put it all together. Like, all these things are really difficult, but, you know, I never tried to get out of it. I always enjoyed doing it on some level. So I figured, well, I should keep doing this because I actually like this.
Yeah. I think we're very similar in that regard. Now, I wanted to be a cartoonist originally, but I did a number of years with my friend Dane. We did a bunch of celebrity interviews and stuff like that. But and we did a couple comedy shows and things like that. But I had fun editing them and stuff like that at the time. But I found that to be very, very tedious. And it's like I wanted to just like, here's what I shot, you fix it, you do it, and so I'm like you, I kind of moved off into more writing. But I was just curious, it's like, so on your writing then, did you have a preference? I know you did a book, and you'll have to refresh my memory because it's been so many years. Did you have a preference for writing more fiction or nonfiction?
Well, I started out with fiction, and I think that was the dream. But I didn't really consider nonfiction until I was thinking of it as a way to make money. But as soon as I moved into nonfiction, like, the fiction just stopped. That just became what I liked, and I also felt like I was much better at it than I was at fiction.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That it's similar. It's just like, yeah, I think there's that dream of writing a novel, but. And I can do it to the point where it's a job. I can do it every day. So yeah, I haven't really written fiction in quite a while.
What was that book that you did put out? I forgot.
It was called True Stories from a Wasteland Called Earth. Yeah, it's just self-published.
Yeah, but I did like it at the time. I said, wow, this is actually really good. Because I don't know if you get this because you're a published author, but you get people that go, can you read this? And then you go, I don't want to read this, but you can't tell them no. It's like, yeah, I'll take a look at it. And then you go, oh, this is pretty good, or, it's like, and then when it's bad, you have to tell, how can I improve it? Stop being a writer? No. But, you have, from what I've read on that book, well, I read that book completely, but on the new Ska book, you have the type of writing style that I like. It's very easy to read. You don't get too scholarly, because there's a lot of writers that think, oh, I'm writing about music, I got to be really highbrow and write, intellectually about stuff. And it's like, just write how you, not how you speak necessarily, because it might have a lot of slang, but, it's like, just if you're trying to convey an idea like you're doing, write in a way that makes it easy for the other person to grasp it. So
yeah, I definitely enjoy reading like really dense, long music history books, but I didn't want to write that kind of book personally. I wanted to write a book for In Defense of Ska that was took more points of view and argued the points of view. So I mean, the larger point of view of the book is that I'm defending ska, that I think it deserves respect that it hasn't gotten. But the book consists of each chapter is a separate essay, And each essay has some specific point of view that I'm telling. It's not just, here's this band and here's their history. There's an angle, and then there's a reason I'm telling you all this information. So that was something I wanted to do for this. Rather than, even though I enjoy the 500-page, crazy in-depth, you probably way too much information history book. I didn't want to put
like
that
my
out.
books. I don't know if you know this guy named Stu Shostak. He has a podcast, and I've been on it a couple times, and a couple of my books have been these big 500-page tomes, like on Dennis the Menace or something, and he goes, "Oh, good, another doorstop." It's like,
Well, that stuff's really important because that stuff, whether it's in cartoons or music, that stuff is like documents. It exists as documents for this stuff, and for people who enjoy it, that's amazing. For people who don't enjoy it, it still exists as the document for the stuff for other people to read and other people to kind of put out there in other ways. So I really appreciate that kind of writing and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And I always figure, hey, if you wanted to distill it down further into a slimmer volume, well, you got mine as a reference now. It's like, I just cram everything. There's this other guy that his name Mark Grams has written a lot of books about old radio shows and stuff like that. And he writes like these ones that are like 2-inch thick about, he's done Duffy's Tavern and things like that, and it's like, how can you write so much about it? But he gets all this minutia history about everything. So.
Yeah.
So what's next on the agenda after Ska? I mean, is there another music volume, or are you going to go in a totally different direction? What are your thoughts for other books?
I do have I have a couple book ideas in the works. They're music related. They're not ska related, but I don't really want to share them yet, just because I'm putting together proposals and I kind of want to get them out. And I don't know. I kind of want to get a yes on them before I make any sort of public declaration.
It's a little too early. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, because sometimes people are like, I'm working on this, which is usually me. So it's like,
this book, this In Defense of Ska, as compared to the first one we talked about, which I self-published, I got a publisher to put it out, and I got a publisher to put it out based off of a proposal. And to me, that seems like that works for me, because having a proposal and having a publisher interested, that like gave me the push to do it, and it gave me the confidence that I knew I would do it. So that's when I was really talking about it publicly, was when I got that deal with the publisher, like in 2018. So that's kind of how at this stage, that's how I'm going to approach it. Like, if I don't have a deal, even if I start working on it, I don't know that I'm going to finish it. So if somebody says, yes, here's a contract, I know I'll finish it.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what I kind of meant. If you're working on something that you already have a contract set up. Yeah.
No, not yet.
Like for me, I'm working on a Disney book and a Mad book, but I have contracts out there. So, but I have other ideas, but I'm not really going to throw them out there because you might take it. No. But you mentioned you have a publisher for this. So what's the publisher? I was just curious. And how did you approach it, or did they approach you?
So they're called Clash Books. And by the way, my book's available for pre-order on their website.
Okay.
The book comes out in May next year, but you can order it now on the website. And, if you order it off their website, you'll get it in April. It's going to be probably on Amazon and bookstores, probably for pre-order in December, but I think it's better to get it off the publisher's website, and more money goes to me and the publisher than if you got it on Amazon anyway. So just put that out there. Clash, they do kind of a variety of things, fiction, nonfiction, poetry. I wrote this proposal in summer 2018 because part of the reason I wrote it is because I didn't feel like I had a really good direction for this book. I was sort of collecting interviews and having all kinds of different thoughts about which direction it should go, but always sort of changing my mind on that. So I wrote a proposal partly to refine my idea, but also to get myself to do it. Like, I'm going to write this proposal. If somebody says yes, then I'm going to put energy into it. And if it doesn't, maybe I need to like think of something else.
Mm-hmm.
Because before that, the first 5 years, I would work on it, put it aside, work on it, put it aside. You know, it never was like a top priority because I didn't have anything invested in terms of other people.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
I was under the impression you had an agreement all these years, and I go, wow,
No.
they're really patient.
No. No, it was mostly interviewing those first 5 years and continuously brainstorming and sort of saying this was what I'm going to do and then changing it. And a lot of research, just a ton of research.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I knew a lot about ska before 2013, but in that 5 years, I really learned a lot about ska. So that put me in a really good position to write the book the last few years. I wrote them a proposal that was a defense, and that's actually when I came up with the idea that I was defending the music when I wrote the proposal.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it clicked. I said, this is the idea. This is the angle. This is how I'm going to talk about ska. I'm going to like sort of take the fact that it's made fun of and I'm going to sort of address it directly and bake it into the book itself, not sort of skirt around it. Mm-hmm. And I sent it to this publisher, Clash, because they were a friend of a friend.
Oh.
I asked my friend, he's a publisher, he worked solely in fiction, and he loves ska. I knew he wouldn't put it out because he didn't deal in nonfiction. But I thought he might know somebody. He said, oh, you should try Clash. They're great. They're amazing people. I sent them the proposal, and they said yes. They're the only people that said yes, by the way. I sent the proposal to a variety of agents, publishers.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that was my next question.
I got a few no's. Yeah. I got a few passes and a lot of nothings, you know.
Mm-hmm.
They said yes, we love this idea. You know, we did a contract. It happened pretty fast.
Yeah.
After they said yes, and I got to know them, I learned that they don't like ska at all. But they're fascinated with it, and the fact that I wanted to defend it completely piqued their interest.
Yeah.
And it put them all on board with this book idea. And, you know, they've really come to love the book.
Yeah.
Even though not exactly big fans of the music still, but maybe appreciate it a little bit more than they did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it all boils down, like I said, it's how you write. And I think you're a good writer because a good writer can convey an idea where, you know, like you said, if you're not interested in it, but you like the person's writing, you can still be interested in it on that level, saying, I don't like ska, this book hasn't changed my mind, but I like his argument. I like how he's talking about it. So, you know, I'll give this a read, you know. You mentioned you did a lot of research and stuff like that. Besides interviews, I mean, are there a lot of books out there about ska or no?
There's a handful of books, but
okay.
For early ska, you're going to see mostly like reggae books with the first, you know, fourth of it or first third of it about ska. That was where I got a lot of my best. Bass Culture is the name of probably the best book I read on Jamaican ska, and that's technically a reggae book, but he starts at ska, goes to rocksteady, goes to reggae, and then kind of touches on dancehall, which is the 80s sort of hip-hop melding of reggae in Jamaica.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then there's some stuff written, there's some British stuff written on two-tone, there's some BBC documentaries that are made because it was so big there on that stuff. There's a few people that have written books. There wasn't a lot of people that wrote much about 90s or American ska. That's changing. There's a couple other people that are working on some stuff too, and that are probably going to come out either right around the same time as my book or a little after. You know, we'll kind of see. But
ska renaissance here. Now, here's a question. It's like, why Jamaica and why this type of music? I mean, if that makes sense. I mean, why did it originate there instead of, say, the logical choice like Africa or you know, somewhere else, you know, anywhere else, you know?
Well, there's a combination of things. One of the things that happened was in Jamaica, a lot of the people there, you know, we're talking about people who live in more of the ghetto areas. Mm-hmm. They loved American R&B. They loved jazz. They would get this music from radio. They would have DJs would spin this music. At some point, you know, there's no clear-cut line because you're talking about oral history at this point and everyone's got a different story. But basically, with the combination of the folk music, mento music, which sounds a little closer to calypso, and their love for R&B and jazz, and their attempt to play this music or kind of put their own spin on it, it kind of came out different. You know, the beats are kind of backwards in a weird way. They flip the beats are on the upbeats instead of the downbeats, and it kind of evolved from that. But it was definitely R&B and jazz were huge influences, and that's just because that music was really popular. And then that became the music that became the music was ska music and stuff.
Were the beats intentional, or is that just a happy accident?
That's really knows. I don't know if there's a clear answer on. My guess is happy accident. That would be my guess. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of reminds me of, I'll talk about monkeys since I have a monkeys book, but there's an episode of the Monkeys where they're talking about the difference between rock music and soul music. Now, it's very basic, and it's like, I don't know if I even agree with it, but, they're saying rock music has the beat on the first and third beat, whereas soul music has it on the second and fourth beat, and it's like, I kind of get what they're saying, but it seems like a very simplistic way of saying, how the music evolved differently. But I wouldn't expect there would be any clear-cut thing. But, you did mention Calypso, and I'm wondering how that kind of, because like Harry Belafonte did big records back in the 50s that were popular here and stuff like that. How did that kind of all fit in at that time?
Well, Calypso was, I think, actually the main country of origin for Calypso was not Jamaica, but like Trinidad and then a few others. Calypso in Jamaica existed more as tourist music, kind of. Like you'd go to the more popular parts of Jamaica and there'd be a band playing Calypso. Mm-hmm. In fact, like if you watch that movie Dr. No, the James Bond movie, there's a band who played ska music normally, Byron Lee and the Dragoneers. They were the band in the bar scene of that movie. Oh, wow.
Okay.
They were,
yeah, I remember the scene, but I don't know if I knew if they had a name or anything.
They were playing Calypso, but normally that's a ska band.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah. And that's like, that movie was like 1960, I think, so that's when all that stuff was happening.
Or 62, but yeah.
But Mento is similar. You can hear similarities between Mento and Calypso, and that music had an impact in ska. Now I'll tell you the reason that ska revival happened in England. There's a very specific reason why it happened in England and not the U.S., for instance. And the reason is because both the U.S. and England had mass immigration from the Caribbean islands, but the immigration situation was different. In the U.S., you had a lot of black people already in the U.S., and black culture already existed in the U.S. So a lot of people that came from Jamaica and the Caribbean kind of assimilated into American black culture for the most part. Mm-hmm. But in England, it was more of an immigrant community, the way we're used to like Latino communities here in the U.S. So you had these pockets of Caribbean immigrants that lived and kind of maintained their culture. They kept their music, their food. They had, in Jamaica, there's a popular way they listen to music is called sound system. They're like these sort of DJs with these giant speakers. A lot of times it was outside. If it was inside, super loud, just bass turned up. You had a lot of sound systems that went to England. So the music was really vibrant in England. Mm-hmm. So you had second generation Caribbean kids who are now English, but their parents immigrated. You had a lot of the poor white kids lived near the Jamaican community. So they're kind of hearing this music. They're kind of digging this music. So that's the backdrop of ska getting a revival in England, is that music is kind of around. But in the U.S., it wasn't really around much because, like a good story anecdote about what happened was one of the architects of hip hop is named DJ Kool Herc. Mm-hmm. He's a Jamaican immigrant. Mm. He brought sound system Jamaican culture to the Bronx, and the culture was, like I said, you're spinning music, and the DJ talks between the songs, and you have the loudspeakers, you're playing it out. He would play that in the Bronx, and he would do it the way that he knew to do it, which was reggae music, rocksteady, all that music. This is in the early 70s. And it just kind of, they didn't really care for it. So, and so he's like, okay, I'll play soul music. That's what they like. So he's spinning soul music. People dig it. They like the outdoor speakers. They like it. And from that, and he talked in between songs, kind of talked. There was a rhythm to the talking. So this kind of laid some of the groundwork for what became hip hop. He was taking these elements of Jamaican culture, but since it fell flat, he modified it to make it more American. But you didn't have that modification so much in England.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen some documentaries on hip hop, but they don't really go into the ska connection too much.
Yeah.
I mean, they do talk about Jamaica and they talk about the Caribbean and stuff like that, but they kind of leave that bit out. I mean, I don't know. Is there a reason why they would leave it out? Just because it kind of is such a difference, from.
I think that's like an in the weeds sort of detail about the hip hop, because there's so much more stuff that happened. Then you're talking about they're building on the breaks rather than the songs, because they're discovering that the breaks are more popular than the actual melodies, and there's all kinds of steps that happen. But the earliest steps were just more the Jamaican sound system culture being taken here and changed over to soul music. Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay, well, I don't know if I have any other questions for you right now.
Sure.
I always usually just kind of wrap it up by just saying, you mentioned you don't really have any other book ideas you can disclose, but I guess give one more big promotional push if people want to get in contact with you, or website or anything like that, or if they want to get autograph copies or whatever.
My website is aaron-carnes.com, so there's a link to buy the book, and the book's on clashbooks.com. And I also so one thing I am working on right now is I'm creating a Substack newsletter. People can sign up on my website. I'll start sending out newsletters this month, and on my other interesting stuff. It'll be stuff about my book, but it'll also be music journalism stuff, and I'll probably do some original reporting as I get going into the next year. And I think I'm working on a podcast component too, so we'll have some of that stuff maybe in December, January.
Okay.
So and that's something that all that information's on my website, Aaron.
Okay. Yeah, I signed up for it today. I just said, "Oh, you have a mailing list." And I know we're still in the pandemic. I used to ask this in the early days. Because I started this podcast in 2018, and back then you could say, "Well, are you going to appear at any shows or anything like that?" I mean, but is there anything in the plans in the near future for, like, even bookstores or something? Wear a mask, but sign some books or something, or is it too early yet?
Yeah, I think people are still waiting and seeing. Since my book technically releases in May, it's really hard for me to know what the state of the world's going to be like in May. So right now I'm just going to do as much promotion this way I can, now, and see what happens.
Yeah. All right. Well, try to help you out any way I can. I always, that's why I have this podcast. It was my friend Lee Hester of Lee's Comics who encouraged me to do this. And, to me, it's like, it gives me an excuse to talk to friends. And also, if you're working on something, it's interesting to hear about it. So, all right. Well, I want to thank you, Aaron, for being my special guest today on the Fun Ideas podcast.
Nice talking to you.
And we'll see you next time. All right.
All right.
Thank you for listening, and thank you, Aaron Carnes, for being my special guest. Episode number 97 will be coming soon. If you would like to comment and or be a guest on this podcast, please drop me a line at funideas.mark@gmail.com. Become a Patreon of Mark Arnold and Fun Ideas Productions. If everyone listening just contributed $1 a month, that would be a tremendous help in continuing the production of my books and this podcast. Also, subscribe to my YouTube channel. The opening and closing music for the Fun Ideas podcast is provided courtesy of Andrew the Slow Poisoner Goldfarb and is used with permission. This has been the Fun Ideas podcast. This is Mark Arnold speaking. This episode is copyright 2020, Fun Ideas Productions. Thank you, and good night.
Headed home to a cardboard hut with duct tape doors. At the price I'm paying, be glad it isn't yours. and don't fall back. Don't fall back.